Now we're going to begin looking at the New Deal, which really was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's plan for dealing with the Great Depression. In 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt became president of a suffering nation, and he quickly sought to address the country's needs with mixed results. Our learning objectives are to describe the nature of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt's political partnership, to explain the initial actions Roosevelt took to stabilize the economy, and to explain how the New Deal ran into trouble in Roosevelt's first term. So, we'll start by looking at the election of 1932. As we talked about in a previous lesson, Americans blamed President Hoover for the country's economic woes. Now, how much of that's fair, it's hard to say. I mean, presidents always seem to take the blame when things aren't going well, and but certainly Hoover was definitely slow to respond, and that just really turned many people in the public against him. By the time the 1932 election came around, they were desperate for change. Franklin Delano Roosevelt won the Democratic Party's nomination. He was a relative of Theodore Roosevelt. He was a survivor of polio and was the governor of the state of New York. Roosevelt promised relief for the poor and more public works programs to provide jobs. He attacked Hoover and the Republicans for their response to the Great Depression. Roosevelt won a landslide victory, winning more than 57% of the popular vote. Now that may not sound huge, but most elections will come out usually being somewhere close to 50-50, maybe 51-49 or 52-48. You get much more than that, and that's really pretty lopsided for an election. Franklin Delano Roosevelt had a winning personality and believed that it was the government's job to take direct action to help its people. Eleanor Roosevelt was a powerful political force in her own right, and she helped to change the role of the First Lady. For example, prior to Eleanor Roosevelt, the First Lady didn't really have much of an active role, but Eleanor Roosevelt had her own goals, and as such, she really changed the role, so that now we always expect that each First Lady is going to have their own area or their own issues that are causes that they're going to pursue while they're in that role of being First Lady. Franklin and Eleanor's marriage played a central role in Franklin Roosevelt's political success. Roosevelt had an appealing blend of cheerfulness, optimism, and confidence. He was an effective communicator. One example of that would be his fireside chats that he used to frequently basically talk to the American people in kind of a very relaxed format. And this made people trust him and feel very connected with him. He was a reform-minded Democrat, and he believed the government could solve economic and social problems. Eleanor Roosevelt were the eyes and ears of her husband, and she directed efforts to solve several major social issues. One example being the lynching of African Americans. She pushed aggressively for anti-lynching laws. She wrote her own newspaper column and had the trust and affection of many Americans. One of Roosevelt's first issues that he had to deal with was the banking crisis. So in order to deal with it, Roosevelt temporarily closed all of the banks to stop the panic and large-scale withdrawals, and then passed the Emergency Banking Act and also the Glass-Steagall Act that created the FDIC, which, as I mentioned previously, now insures bank deposits. I think currently it insures them up to $250,000. Which most people don't have more than $250,000 in the bank. If they do, they probably diversified and got money into other investments. The first 100 days was this critical period of government activity during Roosevelt's presidency. Roosevelt pushed Congress to put most of his New Deal into practice. The New Deal promised relief, recovery, and reform. FDR and Congress passed important legislation after the 100 Days. He created the Civil Works Administration and passed the Indian Reorganization Act. Some New Deal programs included the Civilian Conservation Corps, or CCC, which helped unemployed men between the ages of 18 and 25 years of age. The Agricultural Adjustment Act was another plan that helped farmers by paying them not to grow crops. Of course, one of the things that we have to think of when we talk about farmers is that if farm prices are too low, cutting the supply will help to produce higher prices that can keep farmers in business. But if farmers are desperate to stay in business, they're not going to cut back. They're going to keep planting. So paying them not to grow crops is a temporary solution. It might seem a little crazy, but by paying them not to grow, you can help artificially raise the prices and keep them in business. The National Industrial Recovery Act, or NIRA, was another New Deal program that helped businesses by requiring that businesses in the same industry cooperate with each other to set prices and output. Once again, that's not something we normally would want. We normally like the idea of competition rather than cooperation, but these were exceptional times. It also started the Public Works Administration, or PWA, and labor received federal protection for the right to organize. The Federal Securities Act was passed that helped investors and restored confidence in the markets. The Securities and Exchange Commission was formed to regulate the stock markets. And the Tennessee Valley Authority, or TVA, helped to build dams and other projects along the Tennessee River and its tributaries. Now, of course, there were some problems for the New Deal. Some radical reactions to the New Deal. Radicals believed that the New Deal did not go far enough in reforming the economy, and they wanted a complete overhaul of capitalism. Some of the examples or figures that we would associate with that would include Huey P. Long, Father Charles Coughlin, and Dr. Francis Townsend. Conservative reactions to the New Deal also were not so positive. They attacked the New Deal as a radical break with traditional American ideals, and they thought that the New Deal would drive the country to destruction. One example there would be the American Liberty League. So looking at some of these critics, Huey P. Long was a senator from Louisiana who believed that Roosevelt's policies were too friendly to the banks and businessmen. He started the Share Our Wealth Society. Father Charles Coughlin, known as the radio priest, believed Roosevelt was not doing enough to curb the power of bankers and financial leaders. Dr. Francis Townsend criticized the New Deal for not doing enough for older Americans. He wanted pensions for people over 60. The American Liberty League believed that the New Deal went too far and was anti-business. Opposition from the courts, critics of the New Deal feared that it gave the president too much power over the other branches of government. A couple of major Supreme Court cases that ruled against New Deal programs included the Schechter Poultry Corporation versus the United States and the United States versus Butler.